everyone. Well, as you can tell, I'm doing something a little bit different today. I thought I'd take it out of doors, get away from that stuffy living room, bookcase, all that stuff. Just go outside, take a walk around the neighborhood. They say a lot of great people do their best thinking when they're walking. I'm not one of those people, but I'm going to do something a little bit different this week. So I hope you find this useful and profitable, and you get to see what my neighborhood looks like. And hopefully I won't get run over by any cars as I'm walking around. Anyhow, hang on for some exciting stuff. Now, this week we're talking about working with volunteers and staff. And I know the book sort of breaks it down into two categories, but what do these two categories have in common? What's that? That's right. They're both people. Whether they're doing the work, the service, for free, or whether they're getting paid for it, they're both the same. Now, there are some issues in dealing with both of them. Obviously, recruitment, retention, training, those kinds of things are going to be different with these different groups. But a lot of the things we're going to talk about this week are applicable to both groups. So, let's start off by saying this, that when people come into your church, they come in not as blank slates, not what you hope they are, but they come in with their own backgrounds, experience, gifts and calling, passions, desires. They want to get something out of the experience, right? Okay, so let's talk about volunteers. How do we attract and retain qualified volunteers? And I know everybody's waiting for the answer to that one, right? That's the million-dollar question. Well, the first thing you want to do is understand that people volunteer not just to the church, not just to the position, not just to the ministry, but they really volunteer to other people. They volunteer to leaders. They like that leader, right? And how many times have you volunteered for something because somebody came to you and said, hey, would you like to help out? How many times you got excited because you heard a leader talk about their vision for a ministry, right? So really the first foundation is to understand that people attract other people, not just, the fancy brochure, the vision statement. Those things are all important, but you have to understand that it's the quality of your leadership is going to help determine the quality of the kinds of volunteers that you get. So, people come, they have their gifts and their skills, right? They have their calling. Now, some churches do things like gift assessment, and it's not a bad idea. I think it's whatever you can find out about people, about what's important to them, what drives them, the better off you're going to be. So if you can find out the kinds of things they like to do, in the organizational behavior literature, this is what we call job fit, okay? So if you can find out what people's preferences are, not just preferences, but things like their personality, right? So are they an introvert or extrovert? Are they highly conscientious? Are they good with details? Or are they not so good with it, right? Are they more concrete thinkers? Or are they more abstract thinkers? So this helps us when we think about people's characteristics, qualities, personality, skills, experience. This helps to fit them in a place that's going to be rewarding to them and satisfying to them and not frustrating to them, and it's going to be the maximum benefit for the church, right? Because there's nothing worse than getting a volunteer just to fill a slot. And sometimes we get desperate and we do that, right? We just say, oh man, I need anybody. Who wants to go work in Sunday school? Who wants to go work with the youth? Who wants to help do this ministry? And we're not really thinking long term, how well is this person going to fit in with this particular role? Okay, so you always want to be thinking about this idea of person job fit, or person position fit, if you will, if it's a volunteer thing, right? So get to learn your people, get to know them, place them in positions that make sense for them, for their gifts, for their passion, for their personality, right? Their disposition, all these kinds of things, because this is really going to give you long-term success. Now, you might be asking, well, how do I go about recruiting and attracting these qualified volunteers, Frank? Well, I wish I had the magic answer for you. There really is no magic answer. In fact, Jesus even said something, right? He said, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few, right? So what was his solution? That's right. Pray to the Lord of the harvest to raise up the workers. So I would start by prayer. And again, this is the spiritual aspect. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to end with prayer. I think prayer is where we start. I think we can do a lot of practical things that will help people know about the ministries of the church. I know a lot of churches have things like ministry fairs, maybe once a year. You invite all the ministry leaders to set up tables, and people can just walk around and make, if this is important to you, spend half of the service talking about the mission, the vision, let the leaders come up and talk about their things. And then the second half of the church service, let them mill around and meet some of the leaders and talk about the ministries, all those sorts of things. So there's no secret answer here, right? It's always going to be a challenge getting volunteers because everybody's time is tight. Speaking of time, a good recommendation, I think the book talks about this, is to have sort of a delineated time frame of service for these people, right? Sometimes people don't volunteer because they think, well, if I volunteer, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life, right? Let them know, hey, this is a 6-month commitment or this is a year-long commitment, however long you feel is necessary for them. And again, as leaders, we want them to commit forever, right? But that's not realistic, okay? So consider their time, be considerate of their time. Now, another important issue in ministry today is screening people, right? And sometimes we have people working with children, with youth. You guys know that it's vitally important to make sure that those people are screened. Some states even require you to do background checks, right? All those sorts of things. Fingerprinting. I know in California churches have been doing that for a long time. So do what you need to do to cover yourself, to pre-screen people in terms of any sort of ethical violations in their past and their background. You want to protect your children. You want to protect the people in your church from unscrupulous people that would try to come in and take advantage of our kids, right? That's no good. You don't want to do that. I don't want you to do that, all right? So take care of business in that sense. Now, let me just mention a couple other things here. Sometimes we can recruit people to work in the church and they fit in, they do a good job, they're conscientious, they're reliable, they show up on time, right? I'm like, oh, great. This person's gold, man. They'll do whatever I ask. I caution you, don't take advantage of people. Be considerate of their time. Again, not only the time length of the commitment, but how many hours a week are you expecting this person to volunteer? Do you need them to serve for 2 hours, 4 hours? Be considerate. Don't take advantage of people because some people are very giving, right? And they're doing this, ultimately they're doing it because they love Jesus and they're serving the Lord and they love you, But don't take advantage of those people. People want to do work. They want to volunteer to do work that has several different aspects to it. It needs to be challenging, right? Now, for some people, this, the bar might not be that high. But, if you're trying to recruit, attract, retain quality volunteers, I'm talking about quality people that have something to give. Guess what? You need to give them a challenging, interesting, meaningful kind of assignment, right? So don't just recruit people and say, hey, could you help us, stock the kitchen? Could you help us clean the toilets, right? Now, I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit there, but make sure when you think about the role that you're recruiting them to, it's sufficiently challenging for them and interesting to them and meaningful to them. And when I say meaning, that means it connects with their own sense of purpose and what's important. All right? So you want the assignment to be challenging. You need to encourage them. And again, some people kind of act like they don't need encouragement, but at the end of the day, we all need encouragement, don't we? Right? So make sure you spend plenty of time, maybe after their volunteer time. Hey, thank you. You did such a good job. We appreciate you so much. Thanks for coming out. I know this is a sacrifice of your time. There's other things you could be doing. So make sure you show that appreciation to them and encourage them. And sometimes, we can be critical because volunteers let us down. They don't show up. They flake out. Or maybe they don't do the job as good as, we think they should do. You've got to remember, you're not paying them, right? So it doesn't matter if they're flaky or if their work is subpar, encourage them. Because that's what they're going to remember. They're going to say, hey, this guy, this gal, they were appreciative of my time. They appreciated me. They weren't critical. Now, that doesn't mean you can't, lovingly critique their work and give them suggestions for improvement and things that, they could work on, But do that in an appropriate way. Don't dog them, but you want to encourage them. And then, of course, you want to recognize them as well. And maybe there's some formal settings where you can do that. Maybe you have some sort of volunteer recognition or volunteer appreciation dinner. I was part of a church, and every year we had a big old dinner, volunteer appreciation dinner. We had the Servant of the Year award. It was great. We made a big deal out of it. And you might be saying, well, but isn't enough just, that the Lord recognizes these people, the Lord rewards them, aren't I stealing their reward? Again, that's only looking at one aspect of the church. that's only looking at the spiritual side. Sure, the Lord's going to reward them. Sure, He's going to bless them for their service. But I believe that we as leaders, and I'm going to stop when I say this, that we as leaders are the conduits of God's reward, and we are the conduits of God's blessing, right? So to say, well, the Lord will bless them, the Lord will reward them, the Lord will encourage them, I believe God uses means for those things, and you and I are the means for God's blessing and reward and encouragement and inspiration, all right? So don't be afraid to lay it on with your people. Encourage them, challenge them, and recognize them, and guess what? I believe you'll retain and attract quality volunteers because they know that you're the kind of leader that cares about them, you love them, you give them interesting, meaningful things to do, and they'll tell all their friends to come and volunteer as well. All right, so that's all I'm going to say about that. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. So we talked about volunteers. Let's talk about staff, i.e. those paid positions where people are responsible for certain designated areas. These are people that are more serious. They have a serious commitment. They might be some of your licensed staff people. How do we treat them any different? How do we work with them? Again, I would say most of the things that we just talked about are applicable in a lot of ways, right? I think it's still important to recognize and appreciate people, even if they're being paid. And, you know, some people are like, well, I'm paying the guy. Isn't that enough of a reward? You know, nonsense. You can never recognize or appreciate your staff too much. But let me just say a few things that might be helpful here, okay? First of all, let's talk about selecting. You know, Jim Collins, in his book, talks about not just getting people, you know, the right people on the bus, but getting people on the right seats on the bus, right? So this kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier, this whole idea of job fit, right? So again, you want to make sure that your staff are qualified, that this is a job that's meaningful, that's interesting, that matches their personality, that matches their skills and backgrounds and interests and all those sorts of things. Another important thing to talk about when thinking about staffing is diversity, right? Now, what do I mean by diversity? Do I just mean racial diversity, those kinds of things? Well, yes, I believe that is important. In fact, today, it's no secret that that many churches are becoming more diverse by the day. There's my neighbor walking her dogs. Hey, neighbor, walking the dogs. You can tell she was trying to avoid me. Would you avoid this guy? Why would you avoid a guy walking down the street talking to himself, holding up a camera? Oh boy, go figure. Anyhow, what was I saying? All right, so churches today are really becoming multi-ethnic congregations, and the degree to which your staff reflects the diversity of your congregation really says a lot. That makes a big statement to your people. Why? Because that way everybody sees themselves reflected in the leadership of this church. There's somebody like me. There's somebody who understands me, right? If you have a whole all-white staff, guess what your congregation is going to look like? That's right, they're going to be all white. If you get a mixed staff, you get some Hispanic leaders, you get some African American leaders, you're going to have a congregation that starts to reflect that racial diversity. And why is that important? Well, there's lots of reasons. Obviously, I go on and on about this one. But again, to me, it expresses God's concern for all people, for all nations, and for the diversity that's present in your community. You are there not just for like one group of people in the community. God has you there, and I believe He would have you to minister to all the people in the community, right? So let your staff reflect the diversity of the community around it, and you will prosper. I've seen it happen. Another aspect of this diversity that's important is not just that, but also dispositions and skills. So earlier I talked about people who, for example, are highly conscientious, right? They're detail oriented, they take care of business, they keep track of the facts real well. And then there's other people that are a little more kind of conceptual. You know, they like to spin it around in a circle, right? Are you getting dizzy yet? I'm kind of getting dizzy just watching this. How are you doing? Good, good, good. See, a little more neighborly that time, huh? Okay, so anyhow, so there's some people that are really concrete thinkers, they're good managers, they keep track of the facts, the figures, they're good with details, right? Maybe they're not as good with people. Maybe they're not as abstract at thinking. Maybe they're not visionary people. Maybe they have a very low risk tolerance. In other words, they really don't like to try new things, they don't like to change. But there's other people that are more conceptual, more visionary, like people, they're people, you know, all those kinds of things. So oftentimes we tend to staff and select people to serve with us based upon our preference, right? So if we're a kind of a visionary, risk-taking, adventurous kind of person, those are the kind of people we want around us. Hey, Fido. Hey, boy. Hey, how you doing? It's just me. That's right. Just me. Like he knows me, right? Oh, it's just him. Oh, it's just a guy with a camera. Oh, boy. Where is he? You see him over there? All right. We'll leave that guy alone. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so we tend to staff and pick people, surround ourselves with people that are like us. They think like us, you know, they like the same things as us. Well, guess what? If you have a bunch of people in a room, they're all visionary, you know, abstract, adventurous, risk takers, you're going to get a lot of vision, you're going to get a lot of ideas, enthusiasm, but who's going to enact some of those things? You know, these guys couldn't manage, you know, they can't manage the details, they can't execute things, right? Because that's not their skill set. On the other hand, if you get a room full of just people like manager types, real concrete thinkers, detail-oriented people, they'll have everything nailed down. They'll come up with a policy and a procedure and a plan for everything. But guess what? It's going to be boring as all get up. And they're not going to be able to inspire anybody to carry out the plan because it's just not that challenging. So, diversity of those kinds of things. The leaders and the managers, right? The visionaries, the risk takers, and also the feet, you know, feet to the earth, feet to the ground, concrete, detail-oriented, realistic kind of thinkers as well. All right, now I want to talk about another idea here, and this is from the field of human resources development. Now, what is human resources development? This is a whole subset, a whole sub-science within the management field that says there's a way to go about training people for particular jobs. And there's certain steps. There's kind of a progression, sort of the overall field of HRD that goes like this. The first step is to assess where people are at. What are their skills? What is their knowledge? What do they know, right? Okay, so there's different ways of doing this depending on how specific the skills are or the needs are. But you can do a lot of assessment. You can do this through interview and talking to people and obviously observing them. Hey, you guys, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. And observing them, you can see what their skill set is, right? So, assessing where they are for their current skill set. Now, the next step is what are the needs of the particular job that you're hiring them for, right? Or that you have hired them for. So you look at that as well, and so you get a detailed picture of what the needs are, and then you look at the gap between the needs of the job and the skills and the experience and the know-how that these people bring in, and you train for the gap. All right? So sometimes, and why is this important? Because sometimes we embark on these random training things, right? Okay, we're going to have staff development. We're going to bring so-and-so in, and he's an expert in so-and-so, you know, and it's, you know, he's really good at this and that. And looks like I'm getting smaller. Looks like I'm getting bigger. So we bring in these, I know I am a nutcase. I know. I know it. I'm certifiable. So we bring in these experts, and they're fun to listen to, and they're engaging. They got lots of fun stories, you know. And at the end of the day, you kind of walk away and say, well, what do we get? You know, we just paid that guy, you know, like $1,000 to come and do staff training. What did we get? So that's kind of a shotgun approach, and that's okay. That's one aspect of training, right? Sort of a general, let's give people good leadership skills, leadership seminar, time management, those kinds of things. But really, if you want to develop your staff, you got to figure out what the needs of the job are and what their skills are, and then train them so that they can do that job better. Because if you don't think about what the skills they need, then you're really not preparing them all that well. You're just sort of giving them general training that's good in general, but that's not going to help them necessarily to do the job you need them to do, right? So always be conscientious of the specific needs and skill set that they're going to be, and how do you train for those kinds of things. All right, I'm turning back this direction here because I'm starting to wander off into the woods of the neighborhood. It's kind of a nice neighborhood, huh? I like this neighborhood. All right, so the last thing I'm going to talk about this week is what's called motivation, right? Motivation. Nothing happens without motivation. Now, I could do a whole class on this. Tons and tons have been written on motivation, on what motivates people and what demotivates people, right? There's all kinds of very important and interesting ideas about motivation. Oh, okay. So the book talked about this model. I don't know if they mentioned the author of the model, but it's a guy named Frederick Herzberg. And what's this called? The dual structure, dual factor theory of motivation. And what does that say? It says that there's two kinds of things that motivate people. There's physical kinds of things like what? Money, right? Pay, bonuses, stuff, you know. And then there's other kinds of higher order things. And this is kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You might remember that from your psychology class, right? And these are things like achievement, recognition, status, rewards, you know, challenging work, right? Okay, so dual structure says that if you provide those lower order things, if you don't provide those lower order things, people will be dissatisfied, i.e. unmotivated. But if you, the presence of them won't necessarily motivate them. What motivates people are some of those other kinds of things, those higher order needs, like, you know, need for achievement, recognition, challenging work, status, all those kinds of things. So why is that important? Because sometimes we try to motivate people, and we're talking about your staff now, okay, not necessarily your volunteers, but we try to motivate people with some of these physical things, and it doesn't necessarily work. It doesn't meet those higher order needs. So, you know, say Fred walks in and Fred says, you know, Pastor, I'm just not all that, you know, motivated here anymore. I'm thinking about, you know, moving on, right? And so what do you say? Well, tell you what, Fred, we'll give you a raise, all right? Okay, we'll give you a $5,000 raise, you know, $5,000 a year. And Fred's thinking, wow, that sounds pretty good. I could really use $5,000, right? And so you give him the raise, and he gets his first check, and he's like, wow, this is really cool, you know, and he's got all this additional money. Well, how long do you think Fred's going to be satisfied for? Maybe a month, you know, maybe. You know, and then one day Fred's going to wake up and say, you know, I got a little more money, but this is still the same old stinking job. There's no room for growth. There's no recognition, right? There's no challenge here. And so that money, that bonus did not motivate Fred one lick, and he's going to start looking for a job again. So you have to think about motivation not just in terms of those physical kinds of things like money and whatnot. And again, I know in a church, that's not a big incentive for people, right? People typically are not coming to work at the church for the money, right? That's not how we get into it. But at the end of the day, people have those physical needs. And so we tend to start to use things like money and benefits and whatnot to motivate people, to encourage people, to incentivize the job, those kinds of things, right? So money has a limited value. Here, let me give you a model of motivation here that I think is very important, that has a lot of merit. There's three things that will keep people motivated about any particular job, all right? First one is competency. People need to feel like that they can actually do the work. They're good at it, right? And so this is where the whole training thing comes in. So if you don't think about training, equipping, all those kinds of things, people aren't competent, right? So if they're not competent, then their motivation will go down. The next one is autonomy. That means they have the freedom to do things in the way that they see fit, right? So when you micromanage people, guess what? You're going to demotivate them, because micromanagement is sort of the opposite of autonomy. It's saying, you don't know how to do this, here's how you do it, right? So all of our self-esteem kind of goes, you know? And again, I'm not saying that you give everybody complete autonomy all the time, right? You use wisdom, you determine where they are in their background, their skill set, how long they've been doing it. But again, we're talking about developing people for the long term, for motivating for them for the long term, right? So we have to get to the point where we say, I need to give people autonomy. I need to let them dictate how the job gets done. And the last thing is what's called relatedness. And we all have a need to be related to other people, to work together, to have pleasant relationships, pleasant social relationships, right? So the degree to which that is present in the workplace, that is going to be motivating. So again, if people don't have those kinds of good, solid working relationships in the workplace, they're going to be demotivated. All right, so let's put those three things together. Competency, autonomy, and relatedness. What does that spell? That's right, C.A.R. All right, so if you can remember C.A.R, you'll remember a lot of what you need to know about motivating people. Okay, so do people feel competent to do the job? Do they have the freedom to do the job in the way that they see best? And are they developing quality relationships in the job that will help them fulfill some of their social needs, right? And so church is a great place, of course, to fulfill social needs, right? Lots of good people there and whatnot. So I guess that's all I'm going to say about that today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this nice walking tour of my neighborhood. I know maybe I was a little distracted at points. There was dogs and people walking through, but I thought I'd do something a little different. So that's all I got to say this week. Many blessings upon you this week as you engage in the discussion board, and God bless you. We'll see you all online.